Hello, board gamers of the world. Welcome to the Curious Box. One more Thursday, and here we are with our new guest, Elizabeth Hargrave. I hope I'm pronouncing it well. She's an American designer, game designer behind the smash hit Wingspan, but not only. And we are here to listen to what she has to say about her games, about her life, about everything. It's right after the intro. Check it out. Hi, Elizabeth. Welcome to the Curious Box.
Thanks for
Uh,
having me.
it's a great pleasure having you here. In Portugal, we have many fans of yours and many fans of your games, and I'm personally a fan. So it's a great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. It's been so fun to see everyone around the world playing my games. It's pretty wild.
And I actually think you are the first woman I'm interviewing in my channel. I think so. I'm not completely sure, but I think so. Yeah. So let's start from the beginning. Tell me a little bit about you. Where are you? Where do you come from? Your previous life before board games took care of you.
Yeah. I live just outside of Washington, D.C. I came here to work for the federal government. I worked for many years, maybe 20 years or so, on healthcare policy and specifically the federal programs that help old people and people with very low incomes to get insurance when they can't buy it themselves. So Medicare and Medicaid, we call them. So I worked for some time directly for the government as a government employee, and for a while for the part of the government that runs those programs, and then I worked for the Congress for a while, and then I left and I became a private consultant and was just kind of working freelance, doing research projects for some foundations and for some government offices. So that freelance work actually was really compatible with starting to do game design because it let me have some more control over my schedule.
How did
Even though I
you?
didn't realize it when I started to do freelance.
How do you started with? I mean, with this board games passion, it comes from childhood. It came later.
I mean, my family always played some like very mainstream board games, and a lot of card games. Like I remember playing a lot of Hearts in my family and Gin Rummy, and Scrabble. We played a lot of Scrabble.
We all did.
My brother and I still play Scrabble. He's very competitive. But yeah, hobby games. I think I started playing in about 2005. And I was at a retreat weekend where people were going skiing. I grew up in Florida, which is very warm and does not have snow, and I do not enjoy the snow. But I was there because my friends were there, and it's pretty. But someone had brought a bunch of board games, and that was much more interesting to me than the skiing. So that I think that weekend I played Carcassonne and Ticket to Ride and Blockus. I don't remember what else was it. Like I was totally hooked.
And okay, when did you decide? When did you think? Okay, uh, maybe I should create one board game or two or three.
Yeah,
When was this moment?
it was almost 10 years later, and I had been playing board games and was really starting to notice like that the themes fall into very few specific categories, right? So you have all the games that are like historical Europe trading stuff, trading in the Mediterranean, right? You have a lot of train games, a lot of games about building castles. You know, like there's very specific things that you just see over and over. Like my friends at one point we were like, we are not buying any more games about castles. No more castles. We're done. So which, you know, as Americans, castles are not really like part of our everyday experience. Anyway, so like it came out of that, of like, why are there no games about that? Like, I do not care about castles or trains or, you know, trading. And so like, what would a game look like that was about something that I actually like spend my time thinking about? That's something that I care about. Yeah.
So farming.
Right. Well, that would be on the list. I do have a big garden. And you know, I have a feeling that that's how some farming games start, right? Is that is something that people are interested in.
Yes.
But
And they're connected with daily. I'm surprised. I have to tell you this. I'm very surprised on how many farming games there are, and how successful there are. It's
I
impressive.
mean, I think part of it is that we have a natural affinity for building things, right? And growing things. And like it feels really good when you build something up in a game and have something to show for it. And I think that that's something that farming games sort of tap into. You always end up with more than you started with.
And animals are always cute.
Right.
And I know you have a huge passion for nature. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I just really enjoy nature. I grew up, when I was a young child, we lived out in the middle of the woods. And my mother was a biology teacher. We moved sort of when I was 12, and both of those things changed. But yeah, it's just my family has always spent a lot of time outdoors and been interested in nature, and it's something that I have carried on into my adult life for sure. I was getting more serious about birding at the time that I started designing Wingspan. I had always sort of like noticed birds, and I owned a pair of binoculars, but you know, maybe I could have identified 20 species, or I don't know. But I was like getting more serious about like actually going out during the day and saying like, I am going birding. I'm going out to look for the birds specifically.
So Wingspan was your first attempt to design a game?
It was, and
Really?
I
The very first.
worked on it for years. I mean, my first attempt was not good. It was not what got published, right? But instead of switching gears, I just kept working on it and working on it and working on it until it got better and better.
Tell me a little bit about the process of creating Wingspan.
Yeah, so I mean, my very first draft was just on little pieces of paper, just in pencil, making up some bird cards, playing with myself. You know, you have two hands, just play against yourself and see if I had something there. And then I got my husband to play with me, and then with some friends, and eventually so at the same time, really, I was reading a lot about how do people design board games, and how do you get a game tested, and what really needs to happen to make it good. And I had been playing board games for long enough that I had the image in my mind, or the gut feeling of like what a game feels like when it's good. And I knew sort of how far I had to go. And so I really wanted to figure out how like what's the process that designers go through to get there. So eventually I started going to public events that were for playtesting and meeting other designers. There's a really big playtesting convention up in Baltimore, which is about an hour and a half from me, called Unpub. So that was like my first big I just like jumped in.
How was the reaction? How was the reaction to your game during that convention?
That first one, I got a lot of criticism. I mean, it was still very rough. But I met a lot of people, and I met a lot of people that are local here in the Washington, D.C. area, and that was huge because then I could go to more regular events. So there's a group here that meets monthly. Eventually, a few of us figured out that we were all doing freelance consulting work and could meet weekly during the week, without committing to using up like a good chunk of a Saturday every week, which is painful for us and for our families, right? But if you have some time during the week, that's like easier to work in with the rest of your life, if you have that flexibility in your work. So until the pandemic started, for several years, I was meeting weekly with other board game designers, and that's just huge to move things forward and see what other people are doing to get like really good feedback on my games, because they're thinking about it from the design perspective and not just as players. So that was a big part of my process. And then once I got signed, I was also, on top of that, going back and forth with Jamie Stegmeyer, who was sort of working as a
We'll get there. We'll get there. First, I want to know, when did you realize finally you have something, you had a good game?
I think it was at the monthly meetings, which are a little bit more public, right? So just random people come and play games, but they know a bunch of designers will be at the board game cafe, come play their unfinished games. I started getting people being like, so when is this going on Kickstarter? I'm ready to buy this now. And just not having, people weren't having a lot of critiques at the end of a gameplay. They were just saying like, ready to buy it. I was like, okay, I guess like if I'm not getting a lot of suggested changes or complaints, like I think this is ready to pitch. At that point, I had already figured out I did not want to go on Kickstarter because I think there are fundamentally things that I am bad at that you need to be good at to do a Kickstarter, right? Like I'm just not interested in a lot of marketing types of. So I knew I wanted to pitch to a publisher. Yeah.
So you started pitching to publishers.
Yeah.
Do you know to how many publishers did you pitch? Have you pitched your game?
I don't remember how many emails I sent. I decided I was going to go to Gen Con. And so I started emailing to set up meetings at Gen Con. I did a lot of research on which publishers were going to be there, what games they had in their catalogs, whether it seemed like they would be interested in a tableau building game about birds, that was the question, right? Like, how do I find a publisher that will even be interested? I don't remember how many emails I sent. I ended up getting 3 meetings. So I had 3 meetings at Gen Con, and Stonemaier was one of them. So.
Okay, so you found Stonemaier games. It was was it love at first sight for your game?
It was a good meeting. It was definitely a good meeting. I remember Jamie Stegmeyer saying that he remembered looking through his grandmother's field guides of birds when he went to her house. Like it was a nostalgia. There was a nostalgic connection there for him that I think helped. And I think he saw something unique and like a good hook to bring people into the game. We went on to change it a lot from what I pitched, but the core has stayed the same all through, and I think he just I think had a gut sense that this could go somewhere.
From the moment when you pitched the game for the first time to Stonemaier Games until the moment the game was actually released, or until you reached the final version of the game, it's more like this.
Yeah.
How long did it take?
That's a good question. Okay, so I pitched in August. Jamie and his partner Alan had a bunch of feedback right there in the meeting, and they said, work on some of these things that we talked about and send us a new version. So I sent them a new version, I think it was in November. And by Christmas, they said, all right, let's do this. Yes, we like what you did. And then we were in development with Jamie and I going back and forth for another year. And then toward the end of that year, the artists were starting to work. It took several months for the artists to do all the drawings. It was a lot of art. And then I think it went to press in early 2018 and came out in January of 2019. So I pitched it in, right. So it was over a year before it went to press, and then another, over 6 months before it actually came out.
Okay, which is not very surprising, yeah. Because that's how the development of a game works.
Yeah, I think that's pretty typical.
Yes, I think so. During this time, or not during this time, so the game was ready, the game came out. What do you remember the expectations you had before the game, right before the game came out?
Yeah, so if you read a lot of stuff that's aimed at board game designers, a lot of people will say, if your first game sells 5,000 copies, you're doing really well, right? And you'll see a lot of games on Kickstarter that are, 500 copies, and they're just happy that their game is out in the world, and that's great. Yeah. So that was my mindset. And then I heard a podcast with Jamie, because we hadn't really talked. I had just never asked like how many copies he was going to print. I heard a podcast with him where he said his minimum print run was 10,000 copies. And I went, oh, that's more than I expected. I had just never asked. I have been through all 3 of my games. I have been very happy to just let the publisher handle all of that. I don't want to worry about it. So anyway, so he said, my minimum print run is 10,000. I think that's roughly what the first print run of Wingspan was. I'm not actually even sure. And then it turned out to be wildly too small.
Yeah. The response to the game was absolutely massive. I remember the first time I heard about the game, I thought, okay, game about birds. Yeah, this is something different. This is something.
And I think that was, Jamie had gone out and asked distributors and some game store owners, like, new designer, game about birds. How many copies do you think I should print? And, when it was wildly popular and unavailable, everyone was all mad that he hadn't printed more copies. But really, like, I don't think that it was crazy to only print 10,000. It was surprising to me that he printed even 10,000. So no,
yeah. It's still very surprising to me. I mean, I played the game. It's a wonderful game. It's a delightful game, I would say. But it's still surprising to me how a game with this theme reads or touched so many people, because it's now beyond the general gamer. It
definitely
reaches more and more and more people. It's like it's in every house, or almost like this. A lot of people have this game and Monopoly.
I mean, it helps that it became popular among birders. Yes. People who are already passionate about birds. But I think also, I talked about Jamie and how he remembers looking at the field guides of the birds. I think a lot of people have something like that. They've enjoyed looking at pictures of birds, or they grew up having just a bird feeder. Maybe they don't consider themselves birders, maybe they haven't studied and they don't go specifically looking for birds, but they have some connection. Yeah. And I think that's part of it. I think it's also just a very pleasant
Yeah, I
gameplay
think so.
experience, right? Is like part of it is the gameplay, but I do think part of it is the theme.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are discovering now. Have been discovering um, a new passion for nature
Yeah.
over the let's say the past decade. And I think your game was the right game on the right moment.
Mm,
Uh,
maybe.
yeah, I think so. It's a great game, and it's funny because the first time I tried the game, I was completely in the middle of nowhere, in here in the north of Portugal, with a group of friends. We decided to take a weekend out to play board games, and we went to the top of a mountain where one of them had a family house, and one of the games they brought was Wingspan, and I was like, okay, finally I will try Wingspan. And it was a very, very pleasant experience. Of course, as always, I lost, but it was really cool. Tell me one thing. So this was the first time. This was your first game, so it was the first time you worked with a publisher, and and the first time you worked was with the Jamie Stegmaier. How was it to work to work with a publisher, more than just working with Jamie, to work with a publisher, to develop a game with someone who is not only worrying about the game, of course it's the main focus, but he also has to care about the market.
Yeah. Um, I really enjoyed the development process. I did not know what to expect, and I learned a lot about game design in general. And also, I just think like having someone else's mind, like really thinking hard about something is always almost always going to make it better. Um, that's another thing that like when I decided not to do Kickstarter and to go with a publisher, I didn't even realize how big a benefit that is of going with a publisher, the development that you get from their staff. Because that's been my experience with Mariposas as well with AEG. Like that development process definitely improved the game and was a really positive experience. Um, in terms of other things about working with the publisher, I don't, I mean, I don't, it was a pretty positive experience. Like I said, I was just very happy to let them worry about a lot of it. I think that, you said what was it like to work with someone that's thinking about the market instead of just like my passion. And that was a creative tension between me and Jamie Stegmaier during the development process, because his fan base up to that point, I mean, his biggest game was Scythe, right? So if you think of like the majority of people on his mailing list being Scythe fans, he was pulling the game to be heavier, longer. And I was always like, I was comfortable with that to a certain extent, but I was always had in the back of my mind, like, I want this to be a game that someone who doesn't play a lot of hobby games, but who's motivated by the birds can still access it. Like we can't go so far that it's, and for some people it is still too much. We definitely see people, I'm always lurking on the Wingspan Facebook page, and we definitely have people come on there weekly who say, I just got this game, it's beautiful, I am completely lost. So, that was, but I think that tension between the Jamie's view of his Scythe market and my view of my birder market, I think the fact that we were pulling it in both directions meant that we ended up in a place that split the difference and became really good for the market, right? Because we got both of those sets of
You
people.
found the right balance.
Yeah.
It's amazing. The game has been out for what, 2 years?
It came out at the beginning of 2019. Yeah.
Okay, so and it's not only one of the best sellers, but it's still a game people talk every day about.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing.
It's really, really impressive. Um, I mean, before you move to the next game, I mean, how did you approach your next game after Wingspan, after all this craziness? Was it, I mean, did you feel the pressure or?
So, we talked about how long it took between the time that my part was done and then because of the art and just the normal printing and shipping process, there's a long lag. So I had a year when I was done with Wingspan and I had no idea that it was going to be a hit. So, and that is the time period when I designed my next 2 games, was in that gap. But I had no idea what was going to happen with Wingspan. So yeah, both Tussie Mussy and Mariposas came out of that time period. So Tussie Mussy was that summer. And it was really just like this throwaway little game contest, right? And I entered this 18 card contest because there had been a contest the month before and like there were no women in the finalists and I was angry about it and I was like I'm gonna enter every contest. Because the one that didn't have any women, I hadn't put anything in it. And so I entered this contest and then they picked 2 winners and Tussie Mussy was one of them. But that was just a quickie, it's 18 cards. It took me a month. Very different process from Wingspan. And I felt no pressure at all, right? Mariposas, I had done a first draft of Mariposas even before I was done with Wingspan. I had sort of had the idea, it wasn't really working. And then AEG put out a call for women designers to submit things to them because they had no women in their catalog. And so that was due, I think, like November 2018. So again, like right before Wingspan came out. So I pulled my first draft off the shelf and having let it had sat for 6 months or more. And when I pulled it back out, I sort of saw, oh, this is what I need to do. This, it just sort of all worked pretty quickly. But again, I sent it off to AEG and they signed it. Well, they asked for the prototype before Wingspan came out. Like they knew they liked it. I think they played it and decided the paperwork was done right after Wingspan came out. But they've said like they had made their decision before Wingspan came out.
So there was no pressure at all.
There was no pressure. And then once Wingspan came out, in the development process for Mariposas, there was a little pressure maybe. But in terms of getting it signed, no.
But was there
and now it's like there's no I don't know. Now everyone wants to work with me. I don't have to worry about
I'm not surprised. But was there pressure for the expansions, the Wingspan expansions?
That's a little bit, yeah. Because people are so like the people that are really dedicated fans that I know are gonna buy the expansions. They are really dedicated fans,
yeah, I know.
And so that is a little pressure. So far, so good.
Dealing with it well.
Yeah.
You brought the subject of women in games, in board games. Yeah. And of course, I've been playing with several different groups, and most of them, they don't have women. I did just by accident. And I think I'm not wrong when I say that you are probably the first woman to reach a high level of praise on board games.
So there's Inca Brand.
Sorry?
Inca and Marcus Brand, who did all the Exit games and Village, and like she's been out for a long time and prolific. And Susan McKinley Ross, who won the Spiel des Jahres for Quirkle.
Yeah, and
So
Sophia.
I'm definitely not the first.
Yeah, but one of the first.
Okay.
One of the first. We don't
But I think I am entering at a time when people are also seeing a lot of change.
That was exactly the point where I was going to get. How do you feel? How do you feel? Do you think your success is opening doors to other women on the hobby?
I think it was already happening. I think I'm sort of at the front of a wave of more women that are going to be coming in. I don't know. I'm trying to be vocal and to get publishers to think a little bit. So I'm now seeing the other side of this phenomenon, but a lot of publishers really like to work with people who have already been published.
Yeah.
And that and who have already been successful, and that is now benefiting me. But it means that it really reinforces the status quo. So it makes it harder for new men to break in too, but to the extent that all of the published designers, that the 95% of them are men, it makes it hard to change that pattern. Unless publishers are being proactive, like AEG was, and say like, wow, this is really weird that we could have an entire catalog of games and not have any women designers in it. Like, we should do something about that. That is just, it doesn't reflect society, right? And we're seeing people start to think about that in terms of race and ethnicity as well. I think we're several years behind on that conversation and that trend compared to women entering the design space. But I think that conversation is also starting to happen.
Do you feel that this board game world is more open to these kinds of changes than other areas in the society? Because I feel, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel the board game community to be more open to changes in general, and more open to everything in general. Actually, maybe because it's a creative field. I don't know. I don't know why. What do you think about this?
I certainly think it has a lot of room to grow.
Yeah, that is for sure.
I don't know. I mean, the fact that the demographics are so different from the demographics of the population at large makes me think that there are things happening where people are not open, right? I think some of it is historical.
Yeah.
A lot of it is historical. I think some of it is that we're in a cycle where all of the publishers are men and they're picking games that are designed by men, not necessarily because they only want to work with men, but like, they're like in the same mindset. You get lots of people that are, publishing things that are sort of fantasy themed because they're all sort of in this Dungeons and Dragons world, right? And then you lose the perspective of all the people that aren't in that in-group. I don't know. I mean, yeah, there are a lot of people who talk about how much they would like to see more diversity, but then you also have, gaming groups that are like, we're open to everyone, and yet no women come, but they don't do the next, like, okay, why? Like, what's going on? Is it the games we're playing? Is it that we all have children and we're leaving our wives at home to take care of the children? Is it, like, why are there no women here? So I think that's the next step that a lot of us have to take as gamers. So for example, for me as a game designer, there's one group that I belong to that is invitation only, that is like all men and then me, and then I got them to invite one other woman. There's a group that's public that advertises on Meetup that gets a much more diverse than that group of people by both race and by gender, because the invite only one is also all white. So when it's like publicly available, you get more women, you get more people of color coming than when it's invite only and you're inviting the people that you know that are in the same group that you're in. And then I have a playtesting group at my house and again, this is all like pre-COVID, of course. A year ago, one of the last events that I went to before COVID started was the playtest group at my house, where I have very consciously, like, I'm not inviting more men because I want to keep it 50-50 men and women. So there are male designers I know who I haven't invited yet, because I have, 10 women on my list, and I'm not inviting more men until I get the 11th woman, right? And I go out of my way to invite people of color who I meet who I think could contribute, because I think it's really important to get games designed by people from different perspectives and to have them play tested by people from different perspectives. And I've seen it at that playtesting group at my house, where, if you get a playtest of all women, there was one guy that was like, so here we're like trying to kill the dragon, and all around the table it was like, why do we have to kill the dragon? So I just think I think it is possible that games will be different if different people are designing them and playtesting them. And I think if we are conscious about it and proactive about it, we might actually see different games. And then the question is, if the games that come to market are different, will that then bring in different people as gamers? Yeah. And I don't think we know that yet, but I think with Wingspan, there's a little bit of evidence that that is true. Like, Stonemaier has seen a measurable difference in their mailing list and their Facebook groups since Wingspan. Like, there are more women in that Wingspan group than almost any other Facebook group that I have looked at for a board game, like one specific board game.
Did you have many women game designers approaching you for advice?
Yeah, and I've tried to also just participate in groups there's a group on Facebook that's Women of Board Game Design that I have tried to participate in. Like, there's definitely, it makes a difference when you're in the extreme minority to have that kind of support. And so, like, at Unpub that I talked about, that big playtesting convention the last year, or maybe even 2 times, we've done like a breakfast for all the women that are there, and just try to build that support system so you don't feel so outnumbered. Yeah, and it's something that I want some company, so I want to bring some more women in.
Okay, come to Portugal, and I promise I will give you a table full of women playing with you and to ask you for advice. That's for sure.
Yeah.
What are your plans for the near future, game wise?
Yeah, I have a game that's signed with Pandasaurus that they're not talking about yet. It's still in development. We need to hash some more things out.
You can tell.
I signed it with them when it was still pretty rough, so we're still trying to figure some things out.
You can tell us anything. I mean, nobody's.
It's another sort of nature science-y kind of theme. I just started talking with the developer at AEG who worked on Mariposas about designing another game with him that's also a nature-y theme. I've said many times I want to do a game about mushrooms and about how mushrooms trade resources with trees. There's like vast underground trading networks. It's fascinating. It's like, this is research that's only been coming out in the last decade or two. And it's really cool. And it's just like, it's perfect for a board game because it's economics. And
Yeah.
so sometime I'll get to that. And I've started working on the next Wingspan expansion, at least the research part of it. It's this past year has just been really hard for me designing. You know, I talked about all of these in-person playtesting groups that I've been a part of, weekly playtests, and I don't enjoy playtesting online.
Yeah,
For me, a lot of the feedback that I get is watching people and like their facial expressions and their body language, and like I can tell how it's going from that. And when you're playing on Tabletop Simulator, I feel like I'm missing 50% of the information that I would normally get. So I have not been playtesting my own things online this year. I've done a little bit at home and doing solo playtests, and I've just been doing research for the next Wingspan expansion, which does take a lot of time, and so that's that was time well spent. So I've got like most of the information for the bird, and I got to start. I'm getting close to the point where I'm going to need to start actually playtesting, and I'll have to suck it up and use Tabletop Simulator or something.
Which, just to finish this wonderful conversation, I'd like you to think about one advice that you would give to a first-time game designer.
Get your game to the table as soon as possible. Like, don't spend a lot of time thinking about it in your head, because there are things you will miss just thinking about it that you'll see the minute you start to actually play it. And don't spend a lot of time trying to make it pretty, because it will change 20 times before you have anything stable enough to actually like start making it pretty. There's a game designer named Daniel Solis, who's also a graphic designer professionally, who says because he makes things pretty for a living, he has to really try to make things look consistent with the level of like where his game is at in the development process. So if you make it too pretty too early, people won't want to give you the same sort of critique. But if you put something that's like clearly just like handwritten or like very, very plain, people realize like, okay, this is your first draft. I can say anything, we're just going to figure this out. And that's the feedback you want in the beginning of your process, right? I would say also like find other designers to play with. I think playing with your friends can get you started, but playing with people who really understand the process and who are thinking about how games work makes a difference for sure.
Elizabeth Hargrave, thank you very, very much for coming to the Curious Box for this great, very enjoyable talk.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And you guys, thank you for being there, joining us in this great, great talk. One more here at the Curious Box every Thursday. Don't forget, we'll have a new one. The next one will be with a Portuguese designer that you all know very, very well. And for sure, you have played not only one, but many of his games. We are going to talk about his games and some other projects that he has. So thanks again for being there. Don't forget to follow the channel so you can check all the videos we are getting. Don't forget, next Sunday we'll be with João Pimentel for our weekly fight about games. I'm not going to tell you the subject right now, but you will see Sunday 9 p.m. here at the Curious Box. Cheers, everyone. I hope I'll see you soon at a table near you.